So let's move on to number 2. For that, I'm going to grab a slightly different image. Once again, send it over to the Develop module and call your attention to the toolbar. Now, the toolbar is found just below the histogram. It gives us access to all of our local adjustment tools from the crop overlay over to the adjustment brush. Now, if you look closely at the toolbar, you'll notice something new. And it's nestled right here in between the graduated filter and the adjustment brush. And it's a new local adjustment option called the radial filter. Clicking on this filter, I see an interface that is very, very similar to that I have with the graduated filter or adjustment brush. So to use this, we select a new mask, program the effect. So I'll grab exposure. I'm going to just leave it set right where it was before at -3. Oh, by the way, I always find it important to program with the drop-down because that sets whatever you choose and zeroes out any of the other sliders. Going down to the bottom of the controls, I'm going to leave my feather at this point at a 100, and I will not check invert mask. With that, I'm configured and I'm ready to lay down my radial filter. So I come into the image, click and hold, I'm dragging out now, and this gives me a radial shape. It gives me an ellipse outside of which all of my effect is applied, and inside, nothing has changed. Looking at the symbology itself, I have a control pin, just like I have with my other local adjustments. Clicking and holding on that, I can move things around. I also have 4 control points, and these are the little squares that we have on the ellipse. If I click and drag, I can change the shape however I choose to get exactly what I'm looking for, but I am constrained. That has to be some type of elliptical construction. The final bit that I have in terms of controls is I can move my cursor just inside or just outside of one of the control points, and I will get a dual-headed arrow on an arc, which if I click and hold, allows me to rotate the radial filter into any position that I would like. Going just a little bit further into the controls, moving away from what we have in terms of symbology over to the right. If I change my feather, this controls how the transition is from the effect outside of the ellipse to inside. Moving that feather, if I go all the way down to 0, I have a nice hard edge. In most cases, I like to feather. I keep things soft and subtle. Same thing here inside of Lightroom 5. Now, one other choice I have is invert mask. If I click onto the invert mask checkbox, then I see that the effect programmed over here, that is now inside of my elliptical construction. Okay? If you want a keyboard shortcut for that, the apostrophe. Okay? Invert mask not checked. This is the basic functionality. Everything outside is modified. Hit that apostrophe again. Invert mask is checked. Everything inside. Okay? Oh, by the way, this is a sticky setting, so wherever you use this last is where it's going to stay. Okay? Now, with this radial filter, although I'm limited to radial type selections, if you will, it is awesome. I think you're going to use this a lot of places. One of the most common is to use this as some type of non-centered vignette. I could put this vignette any place I like. The vignette, the darkening of the edges and the corners outside of the ellipse. If you want to use this as a basic vignette, a trick that we can do is lay down a radial filter and then hold down the Control key on Windows or the Command key on a Mac, double click, and that radial filter expands to the entire frame. Now we have just nice centered basic vignette. Oh, by the way, if you want to get rid of this, we could either just hit delete on a single pin, we could reset here and get rid of every radial filter, and then you could go in and start over. If your intention is to use this as a basic frame-filling vignette, we can use that exact same keyboard shortcut that we talked about a moment ago to make this happen. So you can hold down Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and then double-click, and now our radial filter fills the frame. All in all, I think that's pretty cool. A couple of other keyboard shortcuts here and to unlock different functionality. I'm going to delete this mask, and this time I'm going to hold down the Shift key while I'm running this out. Now that's going to constrain the proportions and make sure that I have a circle. Even though I start with a circle, I can still go in and drag any of my control points to get exactly the shape and size that I'm looking for. Once you have a specific shape to your ellipse, if you want to keep the shape but change the size, now holding down Shift locks in the aspect ratio just like we see with every other Adobe product. Now I'm going to take this and resize it to be, I don't know, something relatively like a little flat circle. Okay? Something that I found really cool is that if I want to take this and duplicate it, so I have exactly what I want in one position of the image, I'd like to have it someplace else. If I hold down Control Alt on Windows, that's Command Option on the Mac. So Control Alt, Command Option, and then I click and drag, notice that I'm now moving a second radial filter, the exact same thing copied from the first. So Control Alt, it duplicates, and I just drag away that duplicate into some other portion of the image. You will find a huge number of uses for this radial filter. Now, there's a few more keyboard shortcuts that allow you to do different things. I'm going to go and put those on the blog so you know you have them there, and I don't have to go through each one of them here. This radial filter, I hit the wrong key there. I certainly don't want to delete anything. I was just trying to delete a single radial filter. But I think you'll find that all the places you used the gradient and then the brush, and you were kind of thinking in the back of your mind, boy, it'd really be nice to have something that was kind of circle-based. You now have that. There is no limit to how many of these you can put onto a specific image, just like our graduated filter as well as brush. A very, very cool feature. For me, this was the number 2 upgrade feature inside of Lightroom 5. For feature number 3, I'm just going to keep this exact same image up. And the feature that I like the most, and you really don't even see about it or see it or read about it too much, but it's found inside of the crop overlay. And when I bring up the crop overlay, this one, you might not have noticed this in your workflow before. I did. I always found it that it really kind of bothered me. And so maybe I made an adjustment to my crop and said, this is more what I'm looking for, but I'm going to change the aspect ratio. Now, it used to be that I'd come over here to my aspect ratio dropdown and stay instead of my as shot, I wanted, I don't know, how about a 4:3? If I wanted that 4:3 ratio, and I clicked this in previous versions of Lightroom, it would give me the 4:3 ratio, but it would expand all the way out to the edges. And I would lose the basic scaling that I have or the size of the crop. Inside of Lightroom 5, hitting on the new aspect ratio, I still maintain the exact same center of my previous crop. This to me has been one of the biggest upgrade features there is. It's not even championed in I think in the entire list that Adobe has put out. But for me, having the ability to go in, scale, get exactly what I want for my crop basic size, and then jump through the aspect ratios, maintaining the center, that is a huge boost to efficiency. Now, while we're here talking about adjustment ratio aspect or adjusting aspect ratios, one of the things that they have added inside of the crop overlay, I can find if I come up to Tools, Crop Guide Overlay, I also now have aspect ratios. So I can see all these different aspect ratios laid out so I can make a selection as to which one would be most advantageous for my image. Now here I've got a couple of them. We always have the original displayed. I put up a 4:3, 16:9, 1:1. All of these are here. Why? Well, I selected those, and you can make these changes too if you like. You come to Crop Guide Overlay, scroll down all the way to the bottom, and you can choose the different aspect ratios that you want to have when you're looking at this Crop Guide Overlay. So I could make the adjustment. Maybe I want to see just what an 8.5:11 looks like here. Hit OK. Now I have a small set of guides that show me that 8.5:11 ratio. If you want to get back to where you were before, all we need to do is hit the O key. Where might you have been before with maybe a grid, rule of thirds, any of those other tools. I'm just hitting O, moving through the different overlays. But having that addition of the additional aspect ratios, I think is pretty cool. That for me was the third most popular, which is kind of odd that it's in the crop overlay, but I found it to be a real nice booster to my workflow. I'm going to jump back to the library module and tell you about my number 4 favorite feature in Lightroom 4. And for this one, I'm not going to run through the full demonstration. I'm just going to ask you to think about it with me. Do you remember every time you imported previously that once you finish that import, Lightroom would automatically select previous import as your highlighted area over here on the left panel. Now, I found that to be a little bit frustrating. I understood why that was there. I could go in and work on exactly those things that I had just imported. The problem was not all of the functionality that I like to use was available when previous import was selected. So my first workflow step after import was always coming down and grabbing the specific folder that contained the images I just imported. With Lightroom 5, that behavior is now the default. Previous import is not automatically selected when you finish an import. Now, if I wanted to, I could go into preferences and change it so that it would be, but our recommendation at Light is to leave the default. Now, it doesn't seem like that's a huge feature, and quite honestly, it's not a huge feature or upgrade, but it makes everything more efficient, more effective, because we're not fighting to figure out, why is this function not working? Oh yeah, I had to go in and change to a specific folder. That for me was number 4. Now moving on to number 5, the fifth biggest upgrade for me inside of Lightroom 5. This has to do with something called smart previews. And before we talk about smart previews themselves, I'd like to take a step back and just think about how it is that Lightroom works. Remember, Lightroom 4 and quite honestly Lightroom 5, it needs 3 things to work. You needed to have the program. Now, when the program was open, you built a catalog, and this was the second part. Okay? And that catalog contained developed settings, a lot of information, as well as the previews of your images. Those previews, well, those came from the third requirement. Those were your source files or your original photos. These are those things that are laid out in digital asset management, your digital asset management style on your hard drive. And Lightroom would reference your original photos and source files to build previews. Now, this was a great way to do cataloging, and it worked really well. The only gotcha is that if your source files, if those original photos were not attached to your computer, say, for example, they were on an external drive and it wasn't attached, or you had your laptop and you had your catalog, but you didn't have all of those, terabytes of information back at home, you had limited functionality. Now, when your images were not attached and there was no connectivity, we could go into the library module and do a lot of stuff there, but the previews would never let us do anything else, such as the develop module. We couldn't export, we couldn't print, we couldn't do any of those things. With Lightroom 5, there is a change, and that change is called a smart preview. So now, if we choose to use them, in addition to a basic preview, which happens by default, it's automatic, the Lightroom program has to have those, we could create a smart preview. And a smart preview is something that's not quite my source file, but it's bigger and higher quality than what I have in a preview. And if I build a smart preview, Lightroom allows me to do the entire workflow regardless of whether my source files, my original photos, are connected or not. So I'm going to take you through a couple examples to show you how this works. Now I have a folder here, and if we look over in the folders tab, you'll see that I have 2 different volumes. I have my internal C drive, and I have an external drive, just a simple Western Digital My Passport attached. And the cool thing, Lightroom tells me, yep, I'm short on space because it's showing me yellow over here, and I verify it on the right side. Now I've got just 4 images that are on this drive, and they're part of this catalog. And if I click onto any of these images, I'd like you to look underneath the histogram. And what you'll see here is original photo. Now this is telling me that these 4 images, and you can do this for any image inside your catalog, Lightroom currently has connectivity with the original photo, the source file. What I'm looking at here is a preview. I can change that at any point referencing the source file, and I have access to every feature and function inside of Lightroom.